Well, I mean, first of all, welcome back.
Oh,
You just got back from the Gospel Coalition Conference, didn't you? You spoke
did.
there. Now, how was Paris? It was in Paris, right?
I wish. It was in lovely Indianapolis,
Same
Indiana.
thing. Same thing.
I've never been.
You've never been to Indy?
Yeah, it is.
You know, that's where I went near to college. I went to college near
Yeah,
Indy.
man, it's the epicenter of global art.
It's the
and
heartland.
culture.
It's right in the middle.
It's actually a pretty cool town. I met a friend for dinner one night in North Indy.
Oh, yeah.
And I forget what it's called. Anybody who lives in Indianapolis would know. But there's this 20 miles long stretch of sort of walking path where people can walk, run, bike. And there's all this art on the wall. And it connects basically downtown Indy all the way up to like North Indianapolis.
The suburbs,
and,
yeah.
And then where we were for dinner then, I stayed and the conference was in downtown. But I met this buddy for dinner in this small, cool part of Indianapolis that reminded me a lot of like Southeast Portland or Hayes Valley in San Francisco, like lots of cool restaurants and breweries and
That's
tons
cool.
of art everywhere. And, you know, a lot of just hipsters roaming out in the wild. And it was cool, man. It's actually a cool little town. And yeah, God is, we've got, you know, dear friends at the Gospel Coalition, and God's doing some amazing things there. Yeah, like
So what was your talk
6,000
particular on?
people and-
Because it was on being exiles in this world, right? That was the general theme of the conference.
Yeah, I gave a talk on the push and pull of connection and belonging in the digital age.
Oh, cool.
And mostly I talked about the gift of attention, giving one another the gift of attention.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I like that. Nice. Anyways, it was fun.
Oh, the gift of attention. That's really sweet. That's a lovely way to talk about what it means to be pastoral and be caring for somebody.
Yeah, totally.
That's really cool.
And our attentions in the digital age are just
Scattered,
like, torn asunder, you know, by all the
pings and dings.
yeah.
And
So
also, the pace of life in the Bay is
yeah,
hard.
100%. Yeah.
So
So,
there's that.
one practical recommendation for everyone listening:
Ooh.
get rid of notifications on your phone.
Oh.
It's a game changer. I don't think phones should be pinging you all the time. You know, you
Like
got to
in your-
text. You got to,
Like,
you know, like
I can feel it in my pocket sometimes.
yeah, you got to turn that off because neurologically it's making you an addict. So every time you get a ping, this isn't like conjecture. This has been studied.
Yeah.
It's like it's like you're taking a little shot of crack cocaine or something. Neurologically, that's what's happening. And then you become addicted. So
Well,
stop being a crack addict
okay.
and turn the notifications off.
Do you have notifications on for Jenny and your kids?
No.
Really?
Nothing. Yeah, so Jenny
if she-
knows like if someone calls me on the phone,
Yeah.
the call comes up.
Sure.
So she'll call
Because
if
you
there's
can have
something.
people who can break through Do Not Disturb.
Yes, yeah, you can set
So
that as well. Yeah.
I have my kids on there.
Yeah, that's pretty wise.
Yeah.
Anyways, this had nothing to
No,
do
it
with
doesn't.
that conversation.
Okay, so this week we were talking about Matthew 20, and I was thinking about this. This is like the fourth time Jesus has said something similar to what he's about to say. We just
Yeah, it's a theme for him.
it's not just it feels like Matthew is like hammering this, right?
Yeah.
He's saying there's two things that keep coming up. Jesus keeps saying, "I'm going to die,"
Yes.
and then he keeps saying something about to be great in the kingdom is to this low status,
Yeah.
or lowered status,
Descent.
humility, descent, and that's what it means to be great. So then we have this moment where, and it's a little interesting because Matthew says it's James and John's mother that approaches them.
Yeah.
But then in another gospel, it says that James and John themselves kind of approach.
Right.
Maybe that's with the mom. And anyway, he has just said, we're going to go to Jerusalem. He says it very plainly, to the point where it's a little funny that nobody gets it. You know, he's like,
Yeah.
they're going to kill me. He says it really plainly.
Yeah.
I'm going to get killed in
Yeah.
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And that I'm going to be handed over to the Romans. They're going to kill me. Here we go. And they start walking. So actually, if you think about it, we're actually in the last part of Jesus's life.
Yeah.
Matthew slows down, but we're actually kind of near the home stretch of Matthew.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting
I mean,
there.
this is the passion.
Yeah, the
narrative.
last 8 chapters will be you know, the first 20 chapters have spanned many years, You know, the majority of it, sort of 3 years of his earthly ministry, the early part of it, his birth narrative and all of that. But yeah, this last stretch will get really, it'll like focus in.
Slow down.
The timing of if it's a movie, the timing of it really slows down. Now we're almost like in 24, like real time. Remember 24? Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, our first black president.
Yeah, David Palmer. And he dies on that show. That was very jarring.
That was.
And I'm pretty sure Kiefer Sutherland saved the world 18 times on that show.
At least.
In 18 days. That's what's incredible. In 18 days,
he saves
the world 18 times.
Do you remember the time he had an atom bomb in a plane and then he dove out of the plane with a parachute?
It's the best, dude. That show was the best.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So just like that, Jesus is
Kiefer Sutherland. Jack Bauer. Jesus Bauer. He's going to save the world.
Yeah, they should have made his name like Jack Crower, so it's like a JC, like just an overt an overt anagram there. I have no idea what we're talking about. Oh yeah. So
it slows down.
Yeah. So James's mother comes up after he has he's been on the Mount of Transfiguration. He said he's going to die. You would think that she would say something like, "Don't go to Jerusalem. I heard you say you're going to die. They're going to kill you. Don't do that."
Right.
Or you would think she would, like, she falls at his feet. You think she would say, "Think of your mother, Mary. I know her. Like, think of what your death will mean to her." Or she could have said, "Listen, my boys are your followers. If they kill you, my boys aren't too far behind. So think about them." Instead, that's not what she says. She says, "Hey, listen, the seats of honor, like in the kingdom, when you become a king, can my boys have those?
Right.
Your left and your right, these places of honor."
Yeah.
And so it's very Tiger Mom. It's very, hey, can my kids have, and it's clear in that moment that she doesn't quite understand.
No, not at all.
What's going on?
Yeah, she doesn't.
She thinks that he's going to be exalted as like a king, and she's like, "Hey, look, I know how kingdoms work."
Yeah,
because kingdoms have hierarchy, right?
The seats at the right and the left.
That's
really
what
matters.
Kings have. Various people that are high, and then there's middle people in the kingdom, and there's low people in the kingdom.
Yeah,
that's how kingdom works.
Yeah,
and so she's like, "Hey, can my sons be all the way up there?" Right?
Yeah.
And that makes sense. But what I find interesting is that Jesus actually doesn't outright rebuke her. He just changes the definition of greatness entirely.
Yeah.
Like reframes it.
Yeah, he doesn't say, no, they can't. He says, well, I'm going to drink a cup.
Yeah.
Can you drink that cup? And she's like, oh, for sure. Give me that cup. Let me drink it. You know? And then he concludes, well, it's not for me. I
don't determine that. Yeah.
But I will, essentially what he's saying is like, but I will tell you, wherever you sit, if you want a place in the kingdom, you got to ask yourself the question, can you drink this cup? And she then, and the disciples then also,
they chime in pretty immediately and they say, yes, we can.
Yeah. And they don't understand, one, they don't understand what greatness in the kingdom of God is. And then two, they don't understand that to be in the kingdom in that way demands drinking this particular cup that Jesus will drink. And it's a cup that later in the spring, when we come back to Matthew and we have, we'll teach on Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
It's like, Jesus is like, to God, his Father, I don't want to drink this cup.
Yeah.
Because he gets it in ways that these young men don't,
So let's come back to the cup in a second. Because I think there's so much biblically. Jesus is pulling.
Yeah.
We just had a lab on the prophets. He's pulling from the prophets. Yes. But before we get to that, Jesus says, well, you see kingdoms and how they work, how they operate. And people who have power and authority, they lord it over those who don't.
Yeah.
Not so, and he says, not so with you. Whoever wants to become the greatest has to become the least.
Yeah.
Has to.
And like you said, he's already said this so many times. They're very forgetful. We did a teaching on what it means that Jesus, sort of invites young children.
The little kids, the least young ones.
At that time, little children were not like, children are the future. Like there weren't songs like
Whitney.
that.
Thank you, Whitney.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that's not how people thought about kids. Kids were like, essentially discarded,
Yeah.
worthless. We'll care about you when you can contribute financially and socially. So he's done this so many times.
Which is what I say to my son often.
Right.
I will
yes.
start
And,
caring about you when you
justice
can carry your
well
weight.
done at Baylor University. God, your dad's love is only 4 years away. You're almost there, buddy.
You're almost there. Just keep graduating.
Oh gosh,
that's funny.
that's a joke, everybody.
Yeah, I know.
It's like so far from the truth.
right. That's why it's funny.
Anyway, in case there's a new listener, like,
Yeah,
oh my
what?
gosh,
My gosh, this guy's a terrible dad.
We love you, Justice.
So, right. So he's not saying that.
Yeah.
So he redefines greatness in a way that says if you want to be great in the kingdom, you got to serve.
Yeah.
I love Eugene Peterson, and he did a translation of these words, and he actually intentionally, he does this later with the beautiful poem in Philippians that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve.
Yeah.
And that kind of poem in Philippians, that he lived his life as a sometimes it's translated servant, but what Peterson does is he translates it as slave.
Yeah.
To be provocative.
It is the same word. It's
Right.
the Greek word doulos.
So he's trying to say something.
Yeah.
Slave hits different than servant.
Yeah, it does.
Like when I think servant, I think Alfred the Butler. I
sure.
think
Yeah.
the Will Smith, what's his name? Jeeves? No, what's his?
I know who you're talking. Yeah.
The Butler in the Fresh Prince of Bel Air.
How do we not remember?
Joffrey.
Joffrey. Yes.
I think that's what I think of as servant.
sort of elevated.
Elevated.
Not quite member of the family, but yes, family.
Yeah, Mr.
But he
Belvedere.
plays it. Yeah, totally.
But
slave is
slave
different.
is something different.
Yeah.
So I think that there's probably tones of both.
Well, it is the same word.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this here before. We did a whole teaching during How Not to Read the Bible like 2-3 years ago or something.
Oh, yeah.
Right, 3
Dan
years
Kimball's
ago.
book, right.
We did a whole teaching on slavery in the ancient world, and there is only one word, and they're translated differently into the English depending on the translator, sort of, what they think the intention is of the author. But it's the word doulos, from which we get the word doula, which is like somebody who is assisting in a generative activity. And but I agree. I think the word slave, it can get a little bit tricky because we also then start mapping on the transatlantic slave trade,
which is not
slavery in any form, including the form it took on during Jesus's time, is not God's intention. You see that in the end, Revelation, and you see echoes of it all throughout Paul's words. There is no Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free.
But Paul says, I can be a slave to sin, or I can be a slave to Christ.
Yeah.
And he says, I am a slave to Christ.
Yes.
So he actually takes on that moniker.
Yeah.
It's kind of like voluntary servitude.
Yeah.
Because it's a choice.
Yeah.
But I think that's interesting that Peterson and some others like really hone in on that. Like this is a without rights, total giving of your life.
Yeah, I think that's powerful, actually. Yeah, because I think, again, just because of our own modern cultural
and American
baggage,
particular American, right?
The word serve or servant probably feels a little bit harsher than serve. I think serve is palatable, like serve feels like it's still within my control. It's like, we think of volunteerism. It's like, I'm going to volunteer to serve at the Red Cross or the homeless shelter,
Right.
If you are a servant, that feels more like an identity, occupational, like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And then slave is even
harsher,
stronger. It's like, no, this is your life. You are identified as a particular. And I think that's where it's powerful that Peterson uses that word, because I actually think that is what Jesus is saying. It's relinquish control, relinquish any sense of my life as my life, and begin to live with a very deep understanding and committed embrace of the fact that your life, and this is very un-American, your life is not your life.
It belongs to God for the service of others.
Jenny and I, we go through Tim Keller's church, and then the larger organization he was a part of, City to City, before he passed. They put out what's called the New City Catechism, and it's basically the ancient, Heidelberg Catechism, except modernized, and then they have a version for kids. And so we go through that with our children on most nights. And people who are familiar with the catechism, the very first catechism, the very first thing is,
I am not my own, but belong to God.
Exactly. I am not my own, but belong to God. And we can't, as Americans, that's a nice thing to say, but as Americans, the catechism is designed, it's difficult to move on in the catechism without.
Well, the first question is, what is our only comfort in life and death?
Yeah.
Isn't that the first question?
Yes, it is.
That I belong.
I am
body
not
and
my
soul.
own, but I belong to God. Yeah. And that's so un-American.
Oof.
But to belong to God, Jesus seems to indicate, means to lay yourself down for others. That is what it means to belong to God, which is that's what Paul means. Like, I am a slave to Christ.
And Jesus so the thing about this because this can get a little wonky. People are like, wait, what? But Jesus is like, look, just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And then he goes even further, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So he's using all sorts of language here. He's saying, like, this is what I'm doing. So it's not like something I'm asking or demanding of you because I need your sacrifices. This is just the way of God. This is the way of love.
Ransom is a payment to liberate someone who's indebted or something, that's held in debt. So that's what, that's all very intentional, right? He says, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. And my act of service in its most ultimate expression is that I paid. I'm going to pay with my life to free you.
Yeah.
That's not even being a slave. That's like, I don't know what that is. I mean, that's like the most quintessential sort of parental
martyrdom.
Love.
Step in the way of.
It's what a loving father or mother would do for their child
if they were in danger.
And really, there's hardly anyone else you would do that for,
right,
in life. And that's what Jesus does, and that's his vision of servitude, in God's kingdom, and that's the bar.
So I wanted to talk about that real quick, because there's a sense in which greatness in our world, as Jesus defines it, is still the same today. The same thing he talks about, the way that the ancient world worked, is the same way our world works.
Yes.
Hierarchy, greed, power,
we're still James and John's mother saying, like, hey, can I saddle up right next to you when you rise in glory? But we forget there is no rising in glory until there is a descent into death, and we don't want that part,
Right. What that does, but you've seen this, I've seen this in me, but I've also seen it in others. When you're so focused on ladder climbing and power and accumulation, what it does is you walk in a room and you immediately begin to ignore those who can help you on your climb upward.
Right.
And so you start treating some people as non-people.
Yes.
And then you treat other people as, oh, well, those people can help me. So it creates this really nasty, ugly dynamic of like moving up. And people have seen this all the time, right? Movers and shakers and this and that. And that,
I think it goes in all directions, because I think really the issue is self-centeredness.
Oh, sure.
So, there's the whole, in psychology, psychologists talk about the human propensity to despise down and envy up. And, it's a way of like, we often, when we're focused on the ladder, whatever the ladder is, I think we see everybody above us and beneath us and right alongside us as rungs on the ladder
for us to climb.
Those beneath us were like, I put my foot on that rung to push myself up. And what that does is it puts pressure on the rung downward. We do that to people all the time, and then the people above us, we see them as rungs that we can cling to and pull ourselves up, which is also puts pressure on that rung downward. So it's all about seeing people not as people, like you said, but seeing them as necessary sort of, I don't know, like opportunities to simply pull ourselves or push ourselves, push or pull ourselves.
But you're using
upward,
them,
but
you're not serving them.
Yeah, you're not serving them.
And it's about you, not about God or his kingdom or them.
Yeah. In God's kingdom, it's much more about lifting up.
Right.
rather than pushing down and pulling herself up.
So I was thinking about this. I was sweeping my garage last night, and it's very therapeutic for me. And I was
To sweep your garage?
Yeah, it's just a thing.
It's pretty weird.
Well, no, because there's debris, and I want it clean. So I was thinking, like, who are the most famous people I know, or I've ever seen, or met, or in my life? I was thinking about famous people.
You met Barry Manilow once.
I did, but that's
he might
another.
be top of that.
But like, think about like Taylor Swift is huge, and all these famous people, right?
Yeah.
But then I started thinking
Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Oh,
actually,
should we talk about this?
No, probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
My daughter is suddenly interested in football.
Yeah, there was a 400% spike in Travis Kelce jersey sales.
I can't imagine
in one
why.
day. One day.
So let me ask.
Game.
I asked my son this, and do you think that he is now, Travis Kelce, the second most famous NFL player in the world because of this Taylor Swift?
You mean behind what, like Patrick Mahomes?
Right, behind Mahomes.
He might be. I mean, he might become the most famous because Taylor Swift is so famous.
Right. It's like her
I mean?
nebula.
But not famous for being like probably the best pass catching tight end in NFL history. Nobody knows that.
Right.
If you're like non-football fans don't know that. But famous for being Taylor Swift.
Well, he hosted Saturday Night Live. And from what I understand, he was, and I've seen the clips, he's very funny.
Right, but he's not like famous like he is now.
But I'm saying is he on the path toward The Rock? Is he going to be The Rock?
How dare you?
I'm just wondering.
Nobody's going to be Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Is he Rock .5?
No, man, no.
No?
No, now you're getting ridiculous.
Oh, I just wondered. The comparisons aren't too off.
Okay, you know what's really interesting though?
What?
The cynical side of me, this connects to what we're discussing. The cynic in me. I hope it's a genuine relationship.
Oh, you think it was engineered?
I hope they get married. Well, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We live in such a
manufactured
clickbait sort of likes and retweets and shares culture. It's such a great sort of like, oh, let's keep ourselves on the front
forefront,
page.
on the front pages.
But
their next
which
game.
is a pursuit of greatness. It's a sort of like, hey, we can be mutually. I'm not saying this is true for them.
I hope it's
It
not.
certainly has been true for a lot of celebrities.
It certainly has been.
I mean, you think about. Oh my gosh, dude, we're gonna get in trouble here, but I'm just gonna name names. You think about the Kardashians and their affinity for dating professional basketball players over the years,
right?
And what has been proven true about that, not all of the relationships, but several of them, it did come out in hindsight like, oh, this was kind of like a manufactured, very well calculated. It's good
romantic entanglement.
It's good for you as a basketball player.
Almost like the ancient kings and queens would marry different kings and queens of other nations.
Kind of like, Tristan Thompson, you're kind of a mediocre player, but now you're dating Khloe Kardashian. It's good for you. Oh, Khloe, it's kind of good for you to sit courtside at these Cavs games because LeBron's on that team and he's married and doesn't want to date you, obviously. But you can date one of his fourth best teammate and sort of be courtside at games where LeBron plays, which are always on national TV. And the over-under on how many times the camera will pan to you in a game is about 3 or 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's all this sort of calculated, manufactured pursuit of greatness, which is something we can judge. I can judge, but we do that kind of thing a lot, even in unintentional ways. Like I love the example you gave. You walk into a room, like at work, and in most rooms, like there is a center of gravity based on power, prestige, position, and there's something in us. It's like, okay, I gotta. You know what I mean? Like, imagine you work at whatever, let's say tech company, and you go into a big meeting where several teams are there. And then, in those meetings, there are one or two people where those one or two people don't know everyone's names in the room, but everyone in the room knows their names, those people. And let's say you're just trying to casually kind of make your way a little bit like physically closer to where they are. So maybe you'll find your way into a smaller circle where they're having a conversation and they can, But then let's say like the 19-year-old intern, and it's his first day, kind of saddles up next to you and starts talking you up. Most people listening to this have had, at least in some way, that like little sort of nagging feeling is like, dude, can you just hurry this up? Like I gotta, and that's a way of you're trying to climb, and that's in all of us to, get a little screen time, be courtside and whatever. So, I think it's real, and I think Jesus blows that stuff up out of the wild. No,
we're not digging
I don't know,
on. We're not digging on Taylor or Kelsey.
Best wishes.
And
to
I hope that friendship bracelet
Kelsey
that he
Swift,
gave her, that would be fantastic.
You know?
I hope that. I mean, they're both 30. They should find love. Let's find love.
You know, that's what was weird. I always imagine, like, Travis Kelce looks old, and then Taylor Swift in my mind is always like the 19-year-old.
Yeah, she's
Taylor Swift.
yeah.
So I was like, this is wrong. But then I realized they're like basically the same age.
Yeah,
which is so strange.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think, well, all the Swifties are for it. My daughter's very strongly for it. She thinks that thinks that Kelsey's very cute, and he seems like a nice guy because he put her in a booth with his mother to meet her mother. That's she goes, that's very safe.
It's very on brand for.
That's great. So. And she's eating chicken tendies.
Is that what she was doing?
Yeah, but we should.
She did drop an F bomb when he scored a touchdown.
I would
see.
Let's freaking go. Okay. We kind of got derailed. By the way, you know the next game that the Chiefs play is against the Jets in New York. Guess who lives in New York?
T Swifty.
Guess whose album, her new 1989 redo, is dropping next week?
That's what I mean. Is this
T-Swift.
a manufactured?
I'm just saying it's convenient.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm just saying it's convenient.
Also, do you think Taylor doesn't realize, because she has not cared about football until this Sunday, do you think she doesn't actually know that the Jets actually play in New Jersey? And do you think there's going to be just deep disappointment?
I don't know.
What am I doing in New Jersey?
Well, you have to think, though, the NFL is very popular.
Yes, it is.
And there's a lot of NFL fans now who are like, well, look, Taylor Swift went after teenagers.
Yes.
Teenage girls, got them.
Yes.
Then got all dads of teenage girls.
Yes.
We're all in because, we're going to the concert, listening to the music.
And now she got NFL fans.
Now she got NFL dads.
That's what I'm saying. Is this a weird manufacturer?
I don't know. All right.
Best wishes.
Best wishes
to Travis and Taylor.
We hope that it's not manufactured. And the only thing that is manufactured is a genuine union between two people.
I like that, man.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the cup. Because there's a lot in this. Jesus says, "Can you drink the cup I'm about to drink?"
Yeah.
And this is an image from the Old Testament. He's gathering.
Yeah.
And it's going, like you said, it's going to be developed later in Gethsemane. I'd like to talk a little about, because he says, "Can you drink the cup?" And they both say yes. I wish we could have heard the thought process. Like, you would think they would pause and say, "Wait, what cup is he talking about?" Yeah. Is it the cup of toasting when a king is triumphant? Is it the cup of, hey, you need to sacrifice a little for this? What's important for this? Is it a cup of sacrifice? Is it a cup of suffering? And so we talked a little bit about the first time the term cup comes up.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to tease this out because mostly I think in my younger days as a pastor, I would have avoided these passages because they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I would have just been like, I don't understand them, so I'm going to avoid them. I think it's better not to do that.
Yeah.
So the first time you see the term cup is in Isaiah the prophet. And he's talking about, Isaiah's a prophet. He's in the southern kingdom. And Assyria is about to come and conquer the 10 northern tribes. And he's about to come all the way south. And Isaiah says, listen, Jerusalem, 2 southern tribes, we have got to repent. He basically saves the 2 southern tribes from siege. With his words. And this is what he says. Awake, rise, Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord, the cup of his wrath, you who have drained to its dregs the goblet that makes people stagger. So he's talking about this cup. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Your God who defends his people. See, I have taken out of your hand the cup that made you stagger, and from that cup, the goblet of my wrath, you will never drink again. So they basically have been saved from some sort of cup of wrath. Yeah. But then a little while later, Jeremiah, this is he has a vision where God gives him a cup, and he hands him a cup and says, take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send drink it. And when they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword that I'm going to send. And God's going to send this cup of wrath to all the nations who are disobedient, but he's also going to send it to Judah, who have been disobedient. Yeah. So this cup, this image is a cup of wrath, God's anger. I think the word anger or God's anger makes a lot of people uncomfortable because most humans don't handle anger well. Mm-hmm. And most of the time when we see anger, it's really destructive. Yeah. But not all anger is destructive. No. It's not. And so we have to pause on that. Yeah. Because if you think about someone who's like moral and good and loves you, and they're really for you and they're good, and all of a sudden there's something that's very important to them. Maybe it's you.
Yeah.
And you keep pressing on that thing.
Yeah.
There's going to come a point where they're going to get mad and they're going to say, enough's enough. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. We're going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't say that they're an angry person. You wouldn't say that they're filled with anger. You would say they got angry.
Yeah.
Because you pushed on something that's important. So talk a little bit about the cup of wrath, how you understand it, or how you might understand it to people. Because I think people are afraid that God's like out there, like taking off his belt and says, I gotta whip somebody.
Right.
And that's a bad caricature.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the cup of wrath. How would you explain it to a high schooler or something?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it. I think that anger, obviously, many of us have experienced the unhealthy side of anger. Some people are just angry people. And, but I think whenever the Bible talks about God's anger, his wrath, his sort of fierce hatred of a particular thing that is unfolding, this sounds oxymoronic initially, but it's all, and very clearly in the stories, it's all driven by a deep, deep love. And we've all experienced that too, hopefully. You know, we have people in our lives who love us dearly, and at some point, you know, we've experienced the ferocity of their anger, but in the best situations, it is anger at maybe a decision we've made that they know because
it's harmful. Right.
It's harmful. It's not an annoyance to them. That's not why they're angry. They're angry because our choices are destructive to us. You know, it's the parent that can't stand to watch their child continue on the path to destruction. And it's not enough just to give the soft, you know, sort of free range parenting approach of like, well, you know, you do you. There's a depth of love that drives a loving parent to say, stop.
Yeah.
Like, whatever you do, stop. And I will do whatever I need to do to help you stop. And that's anger. And it's not anger necessarily directed at the individual. It's anger that sort of unleashes itself as a means of redirecting the situation.
Yeah.
You know? And so the cup of God's wrath, the cup of his anger in the Old Testament, it comes up for one reason and one reason only, over and over again. There's never any other reason. And it is always the infidelity and the betrayal of his people toward him.
Right.
And on one hand, you know, people misunderstand like God being a jealous God.
It's covenant breaking is what it is.
Yeah, they're breaking the covenant. And it's not just that it breaks God's heart, it's that it breaks his heart because he knows it's destructive to a people that he loves and that he's chosen. Yeah. You know, and
we just did the lab, and one of the things as I was rereading the prophets, there was 3 phrases that came up. God said, I'm going to hide my face from you.
Yeah.
He says, I'm going to turn you over to these things.
Yeah.
And then he says, my cup of wrath.
Yeah.
And they're all tied.
Yeah.
Basically, he's saying, and I love what you said, it's a breaking of the covenant. As I read it, it seemed, tell me what you think about this. I don't know, we've never talked about this. It looks like God's really, really mad at adultery toward him.
Yes.
And then how that adultery automatically, almost always, turns into injustice toward each other. They treat each other poorly.
Yeah, that is the natural consequence.
So both of them, they're tied somehow in ways that I'm not sure how, and I'd love to think about it. But it's always they're always put together.
Yeah.
It's adultery. You have turned your back from me, your true God,
and
look all I've done for you. But there's also, you have let injustice reign.
Yeah.
And I can't take it. I can't take the way that this is playing out. You are hurting each other. So if you think about it, so it's a disrespect toward the parent, but then it's also the kids hurting the kids. Yeah. And if you love your kids, of course, you're going to hate that.
I think that's 100%.
Do you see that
spot
too?
on?
Yeah.
And I think we see it today.
Oh, sure.
When you remove, this is certainly true in the modern West, in the sort of post-Christendom, you know, air that we breathe. and people like Tom Holland, who's not a Christian, but he wrote this big, thick,
Spider-Man,
heavy-duty book.
No, different.
Not that Tom Holland.
Different
yeah.
Tom Holland, right?
Yeah,
the
scholar
theologian,
named Tom Holland. Yeah. Well, he's not really a theologian. He's not a Christian. He's a historian, and he wrote a book called Dominion, and it's about how Christianity, the way of Jesus, he doesn't call it that, but Christianity has shaped the sort of morality of the modern West. And he doesn't get deep into this part, but we're seeing how it unravels when you remove the way of Jesus. So that's a big, long, roundabout way of saying, I think it's still true today. When a people become unfaithful to God, the community itself becomes unhinged. God is, and the way of Jesus is the center point. It is the sort of sun around which a healthy, dynamic,
human relationship
flourishing
orbit,
human community exists. You remove that, and it becomes basically Lord of the Flies. And what I'm trying to say is, like, we see it today. Like the angst people who are listening or watching right now, the angst you feel about what's happening in society and in culture, and I know many people do, this sort of cannibalization of one another and cancel culture on the whole. And listen, this is not, a couple weeks ago in my teaching, I talked about biblical justice and justice is, so I'm not critiquing like justice movements that are grounded in the gospel of Jesus. Like, yes, orphans, widows, the aliens, like that is biblical, but you see it all the time. Like in, this is going to get into like all sorts of, it's going to open all sorts of cans of worms, and that's okay. But like I listened to the podcast, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling.
Oh, yeah.
And regardless of where you stand on the issue, what is so fascinating about that story, and I'm not taking a stand here like one side or the other.
You're commenting on the anger that's
I think
in
what
that
is so
story.
interesting is like there is like a real cannibalization of one another.
Yeah.
Like you see fracturing into tribes, and you're seeing it today, even in politics.
Yeah.
Like what's happening with the GOP and on. Like the fracturing and the tribalism doesn't stop. It just, everything becomes unhinged. Like this one large group fractures into two, and then everyone's angry at one another. But within the two, you get to a different point, and because there is no center point, now those two have fractured into 4 and 8 and 16 and 32, and it'll just go on and on. It's like it goes all the way back to the beginning of the human story. This is what happens at Babel when human beings decide we can take human ingenuity and skill and not invite God to descend and be amongst us as his people, but instead we will rise and become God. We will build the tower to the skies, and we will become, we'll make a name for ourselves. When that happens, the inevitable consequence is a scattering. It's like a constant, fracturing. And then that whole story gets redeemed in the early church, when all of these different people with all these different cultures and languages reunified around the risen Christ and the Spirit he sends his people. Now they become one, you know, and it's like, even if you don't think the Bible is like God's divinely inspired word, it is undeniably the most incredible work of literature. And second place is not even close. Like, we're talking about a text that was written thousands and thousands of years ago in a culture that we like don't hardly know anything about. And it is like this precision diagnosis of what is happening today,
right now. Right.
There's no other text in history that does.
Well, even what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we talked about justice as a value, as a virtue, as a thing that God goes after. But justice is always tied to love and forgiveness. And if you divorce love and forgiveness from justice, you turn toward vengeance. Yeah. And vengeance is not justice.
Yeah, justice actually desires union.
And reconciliation.
It names the wrong because union is not possible. It doesn't name the wrong so that we can kill the wrongdoer.
Right. And so you see the devolving. It's almost like, well, if we don't allow God to determine what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
And if he's not our guide, if he's not our king, then we spin out of control.
Yeah.
So the cup. So I wanted to read you something from Matthew Reeves. He's a commentator. I love this.
He also played Superman in the first.
No,
two.
that's Christopher Reeves.
Okay.
Sorry, that's the wrong.
Okay.
I see what you did to me, and I tasted my own poison, and it is bitter. And I'm sorry for making a Tom Holland joke. Okay, so here's what it says. According to Jeremiah, God handed him the cup of his wrath, directing the prophet to force it down the throats of all the nations who disobeyed him, starting with Judah. Jerusalem, too, would soon suffer disaster as a result of their sin. The difference with Jesus, of course, was his willingness to take the cup and drink it himself, not only for Israel's sake, but for the whole world. Unlike Jeremiah and his vision, Jesus would force it on nobody. He would drink it himself. He knew he was destined to drink the cup, even though he didn't even want to. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make. The prophets point to this inevitable thing that's going to happen.
Yeah.
God has to get angry at sin.
Yes.
He has to get angry at adultery and idolatry. He's going to because of the nature of his love. And the logical consequences of that are separation from God and utter destruction.
Yes.
And Jesus, that's
and
what...
a fracturing
of all relationships.
Yeah.
And Jesus takes that and willingly drinks that cup. Yeah. Now, here's the thing that's weird about it. That's the cup that only Jesus can drink. So why does he say to James and John, can you drink the cup? Is there another cup? Because only Jesus can drink that cup, right? Yeah. Is he saying you're going to participate with me in this work? Because they die. Well, I mean, James gets killed in Acts 12. And John, he gets exiled and probably dies in exile. He might have gotten killed. We're not sure.
Yeah, that's what's really fascinating. These guys in the gospel accounts who are they're young, they're really young men, and they seem like they don't know their left from their right. They end up doing this. They actually drink the cup. They descend.
Yeah.
They become the heroes.
And they willingly die almost all 12 out of
11 out of 12. Yeah. So that's really profound, They
don't get it now.
No, they don't get it now.
But they do get it.
They will get it.
They will get it. Yeah.
And they'll do it.
And they'll do it willingly.
Is so incredible.
It's really astonishing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked about it in the teaching, but again, we had that sort of mantra, based on the introductory story in the teaching, but like the floor is the sky is the floor in God's kingdom. And they don't get that, but the cup, as Jesus drinks it, the cup of God's wrath becomes the cup of our salvation.
Right.
So they will drink it, and they'll drink it in full. Like they will descend to their own death later in their lives, but they will also, express and embody for us what it looks like to truly be saved.
Yeah. I think about a cup that they would drink later on. Jesus took the cup when he had given thanks and gave it to them. Yeah. Saying, drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out.
Blood poured out is death.
Yeah.
And then we drink it too here, like communion. Yeah.
So there's I love what you said, that the cup of wrath, when Jesus drinks it, becomes a cup of salvation. But that cup of suffering, they willingly drink. The cup of death, the cup of self-sacrifice, they willingly drink it. Yeah. And I think that that's our invitation as well.
Yes.
Well, now we might not physically die. Yeah. Most of us probably won't.
No.
But there's a death.
Yeah.
To ourselves.
Death to self. We got really practical at the end.
Oh, yeah.
So Jesus says it here. This is how he concludes. He says, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. And so most of us listening will not have to physically, we don't live in that sort of culture. We won't have to physically give our lives for our faith, despite all the scary end times movies I watched in youth group, Still remember that balloon flying up into the sky. There's like some people who watched it know exactly what I'm talking about. 90s youth group culture. But serving, Jesus makes it clear. I didn't come to be served, but to serve. That is something we are called to do all the time. So our invitation was this podcast is out on Monday in like less than this coming
week. Yeah.
Like
beautiful day.
1,500 of us will go and serve. And we're not doing it because we're like, oh yeah, it's like a nice volunteer exercise. I mean, it is that, and if that's why you're doing it, great. We love that you're doing it. But really, ultimately, for followers of Jesus, it's a way of us giving up a part of our life for the sake of another, for the sake of our city, for the sake of those who have particular needs, knowing that we also have needs, and serving is a way in which God fulfills that need. It's a way of laying ourselves down, descending, so that we might experience life and life to the full, the way God intended. And then we also invited folks, like, whether you're serving a beautiful day or not, maybe another thing we could do this week is to like prayerfully pick one person and give it like real forethought and intentionality and serve them.
Yeah.
Not just like my wife asked for a glass of water, so I poured her one. There we go. Mark it off the checklist. I mean, like, really create a plan to serve them in a way that maybe is costly to you and surprising to them, and just, I don't know. I think those are ways in which we descend with Christ,
That's good. Hard work, but apparently it's the path of greatness.
Yeah.
And the good news is anybody can be great because anybody can serve.
Yes.
That's really, in a world full of climbing where only a few people get to be at the top.
Yeah.
This is anybody can be great because anybody can serve. Anybody can love. Anybody can act. That's really good news. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Jay. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, if you're listening.
Go Niners, is what I say. Okay, we'll see you in the Super Bowl, Travis.
All right, well, thanks. We'll see you next week.